Well, it's great to have the chance to share a few ideas with you today about how do we build organizations that are fit for the future, but also how do we build organizations that are fit for human beings. And I'd like to start by asking you to reflect on a question for a moment. If you had to make a list of the greatest inventions of the last century, the things that have changed our lives that we could hardly imagine living without, what would be the things you'd put on your list? I'm sure you'd have the combustion engine there, semiconductors, all the wonderful pharmaceuticals that we enjoy today, probably the internet, long list of things that have made our lives easier, have made them more fun, and I think, all of those things are important. Having said that, I would argue the single most important invention of the last 100 years was the invention of management. And that sounds maybe a little bit weird. We don't usually think about management as an invention, but if you think about the tools, the methods that we use to bring people together, to mobilize and organize resources for productive ends, that was an invention. And yet I'm going to argue that we're going to have to now reinvent management, the way we lead, we plan, we organize, we hire, we motivate. All of those things we're going to have to reinvent because today organizations are facing a set of challenges that are truly unprecedented. In fact, let me give you just a little bit of history here. Go back with me for a moment to 1890, about 120 years ago. And if you'd been living in America, Germany, Britain, and what we called the developed world at the time, in 1890 you would have found that about 90% of people were still in agriculture. The average manufacturing company would have had less than 4 employees. So it's very fragmented, very small organizations. That was the world circa 1890. And over the next, literally one generation, all of that would change. By 1915, 25 years later, Ford Motor Company is making more than 500,000 automobiles a year. U.S. Steel has become the first company in the world that has a $1 billion market capitalization. And in that tiny sliver of time, in one generation, almost all the tools of modern management get invented. Pay for performance, capital budgeting, task design, divisionalization, brand management, all the management tools and methods that you find yet today in organizations around the world, virtually all of those were invented before 1920. And most of them were invented by individuals who were born in the middle of the 19th century. That's what we can call management 1.0. In fact, if you were going to plot the evolution of management over this last 100 years, it would follow kind of a classic technology S-curve, right? A lot of innovation 100 years ago, a lot of new thinking, and then over time, slowly, that pace of evolution slows down. And in our working lifetimes, indeed, if you go back 50, 60 years ago, the way we manage has hardly changed at all. So in many senses, the management principles, the tools, the methods that we find in our organizations, these are legacies, these are hand-me-downs from gurus, from ex-CEOs, from management thinkers who are mostly long dead, long retired, or long in the tooth, and yet it is their view of management that is still driving our organizations. And I think we need to change this. I think it's time to change this, and I'd like to talk a little bit about why. So I think the first challenge that we face today, which is truly unprecedented, we are literally the first generation in history that is having to cope with an inflection point in the pace of change. Literally, change has changed, and it's changed in our lifetimes. We live in a world today that seems like it's all punctuation and very little equilibrium. Change is seditious, it's unrelenting, it's ever surprising. But think about this for a moment. Think about kind of an exponential curve. Imagine just an exponential curve. And think about the things in our world right now that are changing at an exponential pace. Just think about that for a moment. What things are changing at an exponential pace? CO2 emissions, they're going up at an exponential pace. The number of internet connections in the world, on that same curve. The amount of data storage out there, same curve. Number of mobile devices connected to the web, also going up on that kind of a curve. The number of genes that we've sequenced, also on that kind of a curve. And I can tell you, if you go back 100 years ago, there was nothing that was changing at an exponential pace. This is entirely new. But we face other challenges. The second kind of fundamental new reality for most companies around the world today is hyper-competition. Right? If you go back a few years, there were all kinds of barriers that protected the incumbents from the winds of creative destruction. And those barriers, they used to protect a company's margins. They fattened up, they allowed you to keep your prices high. They fatten the margins. As those barriers come down, every company is in a bare-knuckle fight to defend its margins, defend its position in the marketplace, and the only way of doing that is through innovation. So as accelerating change requires companies to be more adaptable, the winds of creative destruction are forcing companies to be more creative, more inventive. You have to earn your place in the market every single day. Third challenge I think organizations face today, and perhaps maybe the most pressing one. We also live in a world where knowledge itself is becoming a commodity, where it's getting harder and harder for any organization to really differentiate itself, to bring something kind of truly new and unique to the marketplace. Today, knowledge advantages dissipate very, very quickly because your good people go work for your competitor, because you have an army of consultants around the world benchmarking all these companies and transferring knowledge from the fast to the slow and the smart to the not so smart, because all these companies are using the same network of business partners and vendors. That's another conduit for moving all of this knowledge around. So in that world, it's much less about, what kind of knowledge advantage do I have right now than how fast am I creating new knowledge, with the emphasis on the word create. So we've talked about three kind of profound challenges that organizations are facing. How do you build a company that can change as fast as change itself? How do you build a company where innovation is the work of everybody all the time, every day? And how do you create an organization where people are willing to bring you the gifts of their initiative, their creativity, and their passion? I believe the companies that thrive over the next decade and beyond are going to be the companies that make progress on this. The companies that evolve their management models faster than their competitors in ways that make them more adaptable, more innovative, and more engaging places to work. Now the question is, what do you do to accelerate that process? A company that's working really hard to do it, I don't know if they've succeeded yet, but I know they're working really hard. It's an Indian company, an IT services company, one of the fastest growing, most progressive IT services companies in India, tens of thousands of employees. And their whole management model is built on the principle of reverse accountability. Now, a lot of companies talk about, turning the pyramid upside down, that's mostly rhetoric. But these guys are really trying. Let me give you a few things they're doing. This is the company, by the way, where every employee rates their boss and their boss's boss, and all those ratings are published online. When it came to kind of updating, reviewing their strategy, they took all those secret corporate strategies, they distributed them out across the employees. 8,000 people got involved in helping to comment on and build their strategies. That's kind of reverse accountability. Also, they have an interesting little ticketing system in this company. If you're a first-level employee or at any level and you disagree with a decision from your boss, or you think you've been treated unfairly by HR, it's taking too long to process your expense claim, any one of those internal departments that you don't think is serving yourself very well, you can fill out a ticket on them. And so here's my complaint. These tickets, by the way, are visible. They're transparent across the organization. And that ticket can only be closed by the employee. So the manager has to come back to say, what's your concern? Let me understand it, see if I can fix it, or at least tell you why it's this way. And then you can say, okay, I get it. Thanks very much. You close the ticket. Any ticket that doesn't get closed in 24 hours gets escalated to the next level of management. That's reverse accountability, right? People holding their managers accountable. Are you really helping me succeed in my job? And the reason in this company they think it's so important is in that business they will tell you that all of the value is created at the interface between the employee and the customer. Management's job is to encourage the innovation there, but they explicitly say to employees, you are more important than your managers. In fact, the mantra of this company, HCL Technologies, their mantra is employees first, customers second. How often have you heard somebody say that? And in fact, the CEO of Vineet Nair, he stood in front of his customer group, CIOs from big companies around the world, and told them, I'm sorry, for me, you don't come first. Because unless I take care of my employees, they're not going to do the right thing for you. So whatever difference you want to make, aim high and start working. But don't be content to simply imitate somebody else's best practice, because I just don't think it's good enough anymore. So that's number one. Innovation always starts with that kind of aspiration. It's true when you want to innovate around management, like everything else. Number two, to be a management innovator, like any other sort of innovator, you have to be willing to challenge management dogma, right? You have to challenge the embedded, unexamined, wallpaper beliefs that simply, surround us and limit our degrees of freedom. Because you think about it, go back to the kind of fundamental question. What problem was management invented to solve? 100 years ago, what problem were those people trying to solve? I can tell you, it wasn't a problem of being adaptable and innovative and an inspiring place to work. The problem they were trying to solve is, how do you turn human beings into semi-programmable robots? How do we take the farm hands and the housemaids and the craftspeople, get them to show up on time, to tend to that machine, to do the same thing over and over again? That's what and by golly, we succeeded. So that's kind of, all this DNA in our organization, that's the goal it was supposed to serve. So now we have to go back and challenge some of those fundamental beliefs. So number one, you have to have aspiration. Number two, you have to be a contrarian. Number three, you have to be willing to learn from the fringe. Innovation in management, again, like every other sort of innovation, it starts out on the fringe. It doesn't start with the mainstream. If you're looking for, big Fortune 500 companies to really drive this, it's probably not going to happen there. It might happen 3 or 4 levels down, but it's not going to be coming from the top of those big organizations. Right? Whether it's art, music, literature, fashion, the future happens on the fringe. If you want to really see the future of management, you have to look in some really unusual places. And I would tell you one of the best places to look right now is on the web. Kind of management, that's pretty much a feudalistic system. If you think about the web, not so much, right? The web is kind of the global operating system for innovation. So I have a feeling that the kind of values that today characterize the web, we're going to have to bake those into our organizations. The values of openness, meritocracy, flexibility, collaboration, all those deep values, forget the technology, those have to also become the values of our organizations. Why? Because the web already is adaptable, already is innovative, already is amazingly engaging. It has all of the characteristics our organizations lack. So if you want to be a management innovator, the question you want to start asking is, how do you take not just the tools, because sometimes they're kind of superficial, but how do you think about these deep principles on the web, and how do we bake them into our organizations? Right? We have been told that we really can't change the organizations we work in. That we don't have that chance. That's the head of HR, that's the vice president for planning, or that's the CEO. Nonsense. It's probably not going to happen there. It's going to happen with people like Jeff Sieverts at Best Buy. It's going to happen with folks like Ross Smith in the middle of Microsoft, who've created this wonderful grassroots movement around trust. It's going to happen with a guy like Jordan Cohen at Pfizer, who created a way that ordinary employees can outsource the boring part of their job off their desktop without getting anybody's permission. That's where it's going to happen. Because I think for the first time since the Industrial Revolution, you cannot build a company that's fit for the future without building one that's fit for human beings. And we should be grateful we've been given this chance. Because those management pioneers 100 years ago, they were trying to work against the grain of what it means to be human. We're not. The fact is, human beings, we're amazingly adaptable. There are people sitting here today that have changed careers, that have gone back to school in midlife, maybe that have changed continents, that have had to deal with enormous personal tragedy, challenging circumstances. We are just enormously resilient as human beings. So in many ways, human beings already have the qualities, the essential qualities our organizations lack. Because those organizations have inside them a management model that was built to serve another purpose. It's not one versus the other. We have to do both. But my hope for you is that in some small way, in whatever organization you work, that you become a champion for the future. And that you become a management innovator who's dedicated to creating an organization that will fully utilize and fully honor the gifts of every single person who comes there every day. Thank you so much.